Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a couple of milk stouts, and one's barrel aged, one is not. One has additives, one does not. So a little bit of everything in here for today's review. We're going to be starting with White Elm Brewing Company's Sometimes You Don't. This is the milk stout, no barrel aging, 8% on this one, brewed with cacao nibs, coconut, and milk chocolate. White Elm is based in Lincoln, Nebraska. Then moving on to beer number 2, this is Alesong Brewing and Blending. This is called Rhino Suit. It's the Imperial Milk Stout of the bunch, 12.4% ABV on this one, and this one has been bourbon barrel aged. Alesong Brewing and Blending is based in Eugene, Oregon. So we've got a little lower ABV, got some additives in there, and then we've got a higher ABV, no additives, but barrel aged in there. So we've got a couple completely different approaches to the same beer style, and both of them sound great to me. So we're going to get things kicked off, starting with the White Elm Brewing Company's Sometimes You Don't. This one clocks in at 8% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's milk stout review, we've got White Elm Brewing Company's Sometimes You Don't. This is a milk stout, 8% ABV, brewed with coconut, cacao nibs, and milk chocolate. White Elm Brewing Company is based in Lincoln, Nebraska. So first things first, the obvious, if you're old enough to remember the commercial, Almond Joy and Mounds. Almond Joys have nuts, Mounds don't. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. This is obviously hearkening to that, and indeed, they've got their White Elm logo, which is really awesome, inside of this halved coconut. It's probably a little hard to see, but they made their White Elm, obviously white on the coconut background, in this really nice kind of gold color, and it's almost foil looking appearance. It's a really nice looking label, honestly. Super clean. I like it. I'm a big fan. So I'm guessing this is kind of their homage to the Mounds candy bar. No almonds in it, but it's got the same ingredients here, coconut and milk chocolate. So let's get this bad boy cracked gently. And poured right in the glass here. All right, this one's not super thick, but it is quite dark. It's quite effervescent. I'm going to back that off, let the head do its thing. Tried to be a little aggressive, just to give it a chance. With all that effervescence, I'm guessing the head is going to collapse relatively quickly, but it's poured in there. So I've got it sitting about 1.5 feet from my face, and I can tell you it's got a very pronounced aroma. It smells very, very good. So let's hold this up first. Visually, yes, indeed, it is pitch black. It's not an Imperial, but it is indeed pitch black. So visually, looks the part. Head, it's just gonna keep going. It's very, very effervescent. So let's get right over for a proper sniff. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it smells really nice. Okay, so you can smell the sweetness in there right away. You can absolutely smell the chocolate. You can absolutely smell the coconut. There's actually this really nice sensation of a roasty malt backbone to it as well, which you don't always get on a milk stout on the nose. But I can smell it, and it smells really nice. This smells like this beer is probably actually going to legitimately be a pretty close approximation to a Mounds candy bar. So without further ado, I'm just going to top this off just a bit more. And we're going to jump right in. Let me let that pour settle just a touch. There. Reform the head a little bit. It had already settled down and was just kind of still doing its thing at the end. So let's jump right in. Okay. Oh, man. Wow. That is a tasty beer. Oh, man. Okay. I've had a lot of milk stouts that have a similar ingredient list and a relative close approximation to a Mounds candy bar. I got to say, without a moment's hesitation, hands down, this is the best. Okay, man. It is indeed, in milk stout form, a Mounds candy bar. It's exactly as advertised. First thing I was noticing before I swallowed and all the flavors hit me was just how much breadth there is to this body. 8% is not a low ABV, but it's not super duper high. When we're talking, getting into the realm of some of these big imperial stouts, 8% is up there. It's higher than your average stout to be certain. But the body has even more breadth to it than you would expect for an imperial. Mouthfeel, there's also quite a bit more resistance than you would expect for a non-imperial. So we're looking at a beer that's higher than average for a standard. They're not calling it imperial. You could make an argument that it is because 8% is quite a bit higher than the average stout. You could call it imperial, though I think most people would say probably 9-10% on the low end with modern standards. But whatever you want to categorize it, there's no mistake that the body and the mouthfeel have a lot more resistance and breadth to them than I would anticipate for a beer of this style in this ABV range. Now, let's get to the taste. The first thing you notice immediately upon swallowing is sweetness. And the sweetness is almost instantaneously coupled with pungency of coconut, and then the chocolate, the milk chocolate comes on the back. And it is actually the layers of the flavors that they stack just comes bam, bam, bam. But then once it settles and your brain is processing all of the flavor input, you realize just how incredibly well balanced this beer is well. So pungency of flavor, absolutely really high up there. Pungency aroma, absolutely really high up there. Balance of flavor, absolutely really, really well done. So you're getting a beer. They call it Sometimes You Don't. That's the Mounds, and I think they absolutely nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. I've had a lot of beers like this or that approximate it. This is in a whole nother league from all the others that I've tried. I mean, this is as close to perfecting that candy bar in beer form that I've had to date. And it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to jump in for the finish. Think of any additional thoughts. I know I do have some thoughts on the malt bill, but I'm going to go for a second sip before I relay them. Oh, sweetness, coconut, chocolate. It's all just mingling. Quite intense in flavor. What I was going to say about the malt bill, and I got this on first sip, and it's even more readily apparent on second sip. Yes, this is sweet. Yes, it's supposed to be. But the malt bill still has a voice. And it's kind of just that crutch upon which everything else is sitting. So that sweetness, that coconut, that milk chocolate comes through crystal clearly. That is the dominant. But there is this underlying beautiful roasty malt bill that's just floating underneath, and it adds kind of a darker chocolate layer to it and just really kind of cohesively cuts through a little bit of that sweetness, helps to anchor the actual flavors of what you're tasting, and it is just tremendous. In terms of the finish, this one is quite long. The flavors are very bold, they're very big, they're very pungent, and they do linger around on the palate. Where I'm left, it's probably been 30 seconds at least since I swallowed. What I taste clearly, distinctly, and still quite loudly, relatively, on my palate is a boatload of coconut, nice little chocolate behind it, and still some of that underlying malt bill. So the flavors that present themselves, aside from being beautifully balanced, perfectly executed, also have quite a long finish, so you get a lot of bang for your buck on the end of this beer. Each sip does last a very long time. All I gotta say is bravo, White Elm. You have got a winner on your hands here. I'm gonna take my time sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is Alesong Brewing and Blending's Rhino Suit that clocks in at 12.4% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Milk Stout review, we have got Alesong Brewing and Blending's Rhino Suit. This is an Imperial Milk Stout that has been bourbon barrel aged. It clocks in at 12.4% ABV, and Alesong Brewing and Blending is based in Eugene, Oregon. So starting with the label art, on this one, just a very clean design. Nothing really to talk about, just a nice clean design, which always looks nice. Imperial Milk Stout, aged in bourbon barrels, no other additives. So this ought to be interesting. I've had quite a few barrel-aged milk stouts. Not as common as on standard stouts, but I've never had one that didn't have any other additive ingredient. So this is going to be a first for me. Just a barrel-aged milk stout. stout plus lactose plus the barrels. So I'm really, really curious to see what this is like. As you can tell, it is indeed a wax dip bottle. So I have got my handy dandy bottle opener that's got this really nice sharp point. As always, we're just going to score underneath the edge of this cap to clear the wax out from right under and give us a good spot to get a grip. Hopefully I can get this on the first go. That is thick wax. I cannot. I had to dig the top of this into the wax on the top. It's so thick it couldn't grab. But we got it. No problem. That's out of the way. Oh, wow. As soon as I cracked the bottle, I could tell you that aroma, that is pungent. And it's coming out of this tiny gap in this bottle, no agitation. The bourbon is really coming through quite clearly. So let's get this poured right in the glass. Gently. Okay, quite dark. It's got quite a bit of thickness to it. 12.4%, that's a pretty good ABV. It looks to be pretty effervescent, so I don't know how well this head is going to stick around. I'm guessing not super well. That tends to be the case. If it's super effervescent, very active, typically it's just going to keep rushing up and just collapse the head from the bottom down. But, wow, that's a pungent aroma. Visually, it is pitch black, absolutely pitch black. The head that it did form looks quite nice. It's not super creamy, but it did form a pretty good head. So let's get right up over this to see exactly what aromas we've got. Very, very bourbon forward. Slight suggestion of booziness. A little bit of a vanilla and caramel and maybe brown sugar aroma as well. And there's definitely a suggestion of sweetness. Smells very nice. It looks very nice. Head is actually holding quite a bit better than I anticipated that it would. So let's just jump right in. It's probably going to make a bit of a mess in my beard, but let's go for it. God, it smells great. Mmm. Mmm. Oh. Oh. Oh, have mercy. Oh, that is truly, truly delicious. That is not at all what I expected to get on this beer. Man. Okay, so first thing of note is, yes, it's a milk stout. Yes, there's a little bit of sweetness, but this is balanced sweetness. And that bourbon barrel in which they aged this beer is really the star of the show here. I mean, that is just impressive amount of bourbon that you get up front. And there's this wonderful warming sensation right when you first swallow, and you are just immediately hit with bourbon. As you're swishing around the palate, you can detect the bourbon. You know it's there. It's coming on quite strongly before you even swallow. But as soon as you do, warmth, bourbon, just immediate in-the-face bourbon. On the back of the bourbon, there's that sweetness, but it is not overtly sweet. It's like they added just enough lactose that it's a milk stout, just enough sweetness to accentuate some of the underlying tones that the bourbon and the bourbon barrel produces. So that brown sugar, that molasses, that vanilla, those kind of characteristics that often come from bourbon that I got in the aroma, absolutely presents itself in the glass, and really it's accentuated by the lactose. So I think they milk stouted this and added that lactose in just the right amount to really play up on the undertones of what a bourbon barrel aging adds to a beer. This is not overtly sweet at all. In fact, I think the way that this presents itself, if you had this blind label blindfolded covered, the average beer drinker would probably not even guess that this is a milk stout. They would say, wow, that's a really nice bourbon barrel aged stout, or some spirit barrel aged stout. Not much is crystal clear, but that sweetness, it is subtle, and it just plays up on those natural tones that come forth from the bourbon barrel aging process. And I gotta tell you, it is an absolutely genius play, and it works in spades. So head has settled quite nicely. The bulk of it went away. Got this beautiful, nice creamy pad floating on top. You can see this nice residual kind of hanging on the edge of the rim of the glass there. It's fantastic. So Here's what I know. The aroma is pungent and it smells unbelievable. The taste really absolutely did kind of blow me away. It threw me for a loop. I did not anticipate it, and I am beyond pleasantly surprised. So we're going to jump back in and explore the body and the mouthfeel and the finish and how all this flavor develops and ends. Let's jump in. Sip number 2 is always telling. The body is a solid medium heavy to heavy. It's, for 12.4, that's not a low ABV. It's got real presence. The mouthfeel, there was a boatload of resistance. Oh man, these flavors as they develop, it is just transcendently delicious. Honestly, this is top tier stout for my money. Man, that is so good. That is so well put together. It's unbelievable. I'm pretty sure I've had at least one prior beer from Alesong Brewing and Blending. The name sounds familiar. I'll have to check through my spreadsheet where I track all my beer data from video day 1 a year and a half ago. But man, this is incredible. Absolutely incredible. This one popped up on Tavour, and if my memory serves, this one might have been rated as one of the top milk stouts or barrel-aged milk stouts on either Untapped and or from Beer Advocate. And I'll have to double check my Tavour notes from my order, but yeah, I absolutely, if my memory isn't deceiving me, can understand why. Because this is so much better than anything I thought in my head, and I am absolutely enjoying every bit of this. This is an absolute treat. The finish, ridiculously long. It comes on so strong up front. The flavors are so bold and so pungent, and it's that bourbon barrel that really does the trick here. It is so ever present, and it just haunts the palate. It just lingers and lingers and lingers. In terms of the underlying malt bill, it's there, but that sweetness and the bourbon pair so well that they kind of are really the forefront. It's 90 to 95% of that bourbon characteristic, and really maybe 5 to 10% of that underlying malt characteristic. Where you get it is on the back, a good 10-15 seconds after you swallow, and certainly as the finish extends, it becomes ever-pressingly a little more present. There's this underlying delicious roastiness, but it's not obtrusive. The bourbon barrel, for sure, is the main star of this beer, and honestly, I don't know what bourbon barrel they chose, but whatever they picked a top shelf bourbon, and this is just incredible. Honestly, I'm gonna take my time, enjoy every last drop of this. Not one bit will go to waste if I can avoid it, and I'm gonna come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with White Elm Brewing Company's Sometimes You Don't. This was a milk stout that clocked in at 8% ABV, brewed with coconut, cacao nibs, and milk chocolate. White Elm Brewing Company is based in Lincoln, Nebraska. So starting with the aroma on this one was absolutely massive. You could smell it from multiple feet away. When you got right up on it, you could really smell the backbone of the malt bill as well as everything they put in there. The coconut came through very, very strongly. The cacao nibs added that underlying layer of chocolate mixed with the milk chocolate, so you could get this dark sense as well as this lighter milky sense, and paired really, really well with the malt bill that came through, as well as that slight sweetness. Overall, very pungent indeed. It smelled amazing. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste on this one, I was truly, truly impressed. I've had many, many, many beers that have similar ingredients, trying to approach to do the same kind of thing, like a Mounds or Almond Joy type candy bar in beer form. But I have yet to have one that even came close to touching this one as well as pulling that off. And I think they absolutely nailed it with this. It literally did taste like an Almond Joy, a Mounds candy bar in beer form. I mean, the coconut was unbelievable. The chocolate was unbelievable. The right amount of sweetness, everything about it, they absolutely nailed flawlessly. Taste, 10 out of 10. Body on this one was very large. 8%, not a super high ABV, but the body had tons of breadth. Didn't feel out of the scope of normalcy, but it had really good heft to it, a lot of weight. Body, I gave a 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel, really, really nice amount of resistance. Again, it wasn't out of the range of normalcy, but it felt like the beer had real presence. Let you know that you're drinking a bigger stout. Mouthfeel, I also gave a 10 out of 10. For the finish, the flavors were as big and bold and pungent as the aromas were, and it really extended the length of the finish on this beer. You don't often get that with stouts. Some you do, most often barrel aged. This wasn't barrel aged. This was just overwhelming pungency of ingredients and really, really nice finish all to the way to the end. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this was the one category that out of all really didn't do that great. It is what it is. It was on the very, very low end of the scale. I gave it a 2 out of 10. Appearance-wise, textbook pitch black, gets a 10 out of 10. Balance, I alluded to this when I talked about the taste and the flavor profile, but they absolutely nailed the balance of ingredients in this. The malt bill ratio to the cacao nibs, milk chocolate, and the coconut was absolute perfection. Gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling the intangible, I absolutely loved it. Nailed it, 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer swept nearly all categories, head and retention aside. That doesn't really have the biggest impact in the world in the grand scheme of things in terms of beer drinking experience. Example of the style, I did give a perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on White Elm Brewing Company's Sometimes You Don't to a 92 out of 100. Okay, and then moving on to beer number 2, we've got Alesong Brewing and Blending's Rhino Suit. This was an Imperial Milk Stout. 12.4% ABV on this one. This was bourbon barrel aged. Alesong Brewing and Blending is based in Eugene, Oregon. So starting with the aroma on this was absolutely unbelievable. As soon as I cracked that bottle out of that narrow little opening, I could just start getting bourbon right in the face. Got right up on it, even more bourbon, and you could smell that slight sweetness to it, though it wasn't overly pungently sweet, but the aroma was just insane. Malt bill came through beautifully on the aroma. Aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, I am positive I have not ever enjoyed a milk stout as well as I have enjoyed this one. And this had really nothing added. It was just malts plus lactose and then bourbon barrel aged. But it was absolute milk stout perfection for my money. The barrel that they chose was incredibly high quality. That much was crystal clear. The length of time that they left it in the barrel was absolutely just perfect. The base underlying beer, amazing. There was a sweetness to it, so you knew it was a milk stout, but that really took a back seat. I thought that overall, they'll let the barrel do the talking and take an interesting twist on a style you don't often see like that, but I could not have even imagined it was going to be that good. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. Body, big high ABV beer with a massive body, massive breadth, tons of weight, perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same thing as with the body. The mouthfeel had just an incredible amount of resistance. 12.4 again, high ABV. You expect heavy body, thick mouthfeel. This delivered. Mouthfeel gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this was just as long as on the first one, and we're talking both absurdly long. Just the length and the cleanliness of it, just, it's rare to get that in a milk stout, and this delivered. And it was really that bourbon pungency that pushed it to the end. Finish gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention, this one poured absolutely beautifully. That head stuck around. It was great. 10 out of 10. Appearance, as expected, pitch black. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. Balance, same as with the first beer. I think they nailed it. Different approaches. One going for a candy bar-like kind of approach and balancing all those requisite ingredients beautifully. This one went with simplicity, but the balance was incredible. Let it be bourbon forward. Let that do the talking. Let the malt bill and the lactose sit in the background and let it all work together. They nailed it. Balance gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I absolutely love this beer. It truly did blow me away. Hands down, for my money, the best milk stout I've ever had. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, yeah, they nailed it across all categories. It does get a perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Alesong Brewing and Blending's Rhino Suit to a 100 out of 100. One of only 2 or 3 beers I reviewed out of several hundred I've done in the last year and a half, 2 years, to get that perfect score, and believe me, it was well earned. At day's end, totally different approaches to the style, both unbelievably delicious and well-executed beers. I would recommend either of these to anybody that's into milk stouts. You cannot go wrong with either, and highly worth your time to try to find. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.